welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is Matt.
And my name is James.
And this week we're closing out our DEVS mini-series. It's the exciting conclusion to Alex Garland's Sci-Fi TV series. Are you excited for this, James?
Yes, definitely. I mean, we've been excited throughout the entire series, I feel like. I feel like every time we come and talked about DEVS on the podcast, we've been excited to talk about it. And this is no exception. Episodes 7 and 8, the shocking conclusion to Alex Garland's series. It's going to be a good chat. I can feel it now.
Yeah, and I felt the same way as last week, but even more so. So episode 8 finished, and I was just talked about it with my girlfriend for a little bit. And then I texted you, and I had to really just control myself to just send you a simple text that just said, I finished DEVS, and I'm ready to record when you are, and just fight all my urges to say anything other than that over text.
Yeah, I had the same thing, because I'd finished watching it, and I was like, I really want to just talk about it with someone, but yeah, no, I held back. And yeah, so in preparation for today, we have not chatted about it. I'm ready to go. Shall we begin with episode 7, the penultimate episode of DEVS?
It works.
Why don't I feel good about it?
My unconscious mind saying, uh-oh.
What's our plan?
I really need to talk to you, Katie. I'm gonna contradict their prediction.
Do you want me to pretend I don't know what happens next?
So episode 7, it starts with the scenes of the cavemen. I thought that was pretty cool. What did you make of that?
Yeah, and it's got this weird sort of like beatboxing, hasn't it, going alongside it, which was really peculiar, but it instantly sort of was engaging because we know from the previous episodes, Alex Garland's really made use of all of the background sound. Any sort of music he's used in the show has been important and has added like an extra layer to it. So hearing this sort of like weird fragmented, I can only call it really beatboxing, that sort of like weird rhythmic sound that they're doing. And they cut it with a speech from something as well, don't they? Or something like that. Something about a bruise bleeding or something. I didn't look it up, but I'm guessing it's something prominent.
It's a quote from a civil rights riot and the following arrest, and one of the people that was involved in the riot. The following interview, I think it's a quote from what he was saying, describing that. And it's from a recording. I think it's from a sort of avant-garde recording, maybe. I don't know how much of that beatbox element is in the original.
Milk? Okay, individual.
I had to open the bruise up and let some of the bruise blood come out to show them.
It was interesting seeing Katie and Forrest watch these images of these cavemen as well, because don't they say something like they've been there for millennia or something like that and they've never moved? This is the only place that they've ever lived, and like generations and generations of these people were just living in the same place. They weren't moving.
Yeah, that conversation kind of comes up a bit later in the episode, but he's talking about the acceleration of human development and how things used to take thousands of years to develop, and then it was just a couple of years when he was a kid, and now it's like every day things are changing. I'm not really sure what Forrest's opinion of that is, or if he's just sort of observing it in a neutral way, but he seems to be kind of marking himself at the end point of that acceleration, I think.
Yeah, and that really comes into play in the next episode when he finally says what we've been wanting him to admit this whole time, that he is pretty much a cult leader and he has delusions of grandeur. But are they delusions? We'll discuss that in a bit.
So the main first scene we see is the DEVS crew, the DEVS team themselves. Some people I didn't recognise in there as well. But the internal DEVS team, they're watching like a massively zoomed out view of the entire Earth and the Moon 1 billion years ago or some billion years ago. And I think the continents are, shifted. It's pre-modern continent layout, and they're just sort of staring at it in awe.
Yeah, so they're staring at this this planet, Earth, like millions and billions of years ago. And then they start to realise that this DEVS project, this DEVS machine is actually working. And they put that to the test when Stuart gets on the controls and does like a 1 second prediction. So they can see 1 second into the future. And that creates this really weird effect in front of the screen so that these characters are doing exactly what they're doing in real life, but just a second before. And it really freaked me out, and it freaked them out as well when they see it happening.
Yeah, it worked perfectly on both those levels, didn't it? Because it was freaky and weird and uncanny for the audience to watch. It was like a broken mirror happening in real time that we're watching, and that's important for those characters as well, because they're getting this. You can see the unease rising in them as this is happening. This is kind of the start of Stuart waxing poetical, because before he cues up this 1 second projection, he's talking about like the nature of reality and realities within realities, and the whole of reality is inside the box, and inside the box there's a box, and inside that box there's a box. And definitely in these last 2 episodes, that really ramps up Stuart's kind of poetic nature. What did you think of what he was saying about the box within the box, and the entirety of reality being contained within DEVS? Because last week I suggested to you that DEVS might just be bullshit, like Lily suggests, but I think we're getting confirmation right now that it's definitely not. It really does work.
Yeah, at that point, it feels like there is no doubt it's definitely working, at least as much as they can see at that point. But there's still this anomaly. There's still this moment in time that they can't see past. And you spend the whole time going, so what the hell is going to happen with that? What is going to be that moment? What's going to cause it? But yeah, at that point, you're like, I did breathe a sigh of relief, because I was like, finally, we know that it pretty much works and the science isn't complete bullshit. Because I know I had a mini meltdown when you said maybe the DEVS machine doesn't work at all and it's not even a sci-fi program. It's just all rubbish.
Yeah, it's definitely all for real in some ways. But we're going to find out over the next 2 episodes how much of the myth of Forrest is bullshit and how much of it isn't, and how substantial the predictions of DEVS are.
Yeah, so those predictions all lay on Lily's head, really, don't they? Because Lily is the person who ends up, according to the DEVS machine, ends up going to the DEVS building, and then when that happens, this big incident happens. So we know Lily's really important, and Lily has a plan on how to avoid this, doesn't she?
Yeah, it's a great counterpoint to what you just described, that she's this focal point of this incredibly dramatic thing that's going to happen, this universe-defying moment, and then her big plan is just to stay home and do nothing. She's in lockdown mode, like we all are. Yeah,
she decides the best option is just to stay at home and wait for it to all blow over. But things don't go to plan, do they?
Yeah. Arguably the most heartbreaking moment in the whole series. Heartbreaking, but I guess also a bit of a fist-pumping revenge moment, right? Kenton shows up and kills Jamie. I was heartbroken. My girlfriend left the room because she knew something violent was coming, but she heard me gasp out loud, so she knew that Jamie had been got. It was just horrible. It was so sad, wasn't it?
Yeah, because you can see it coming though, can't you? When you see Kenton creeping about and you see him open the door, and the way that it's done so great as well, because you're finally seeing Lily and Jamie, and they're joking about let's pretend it's just a normal day, and like, have you done the dishwasher, and all these kind of like nice normal relationshipy kind of things. And then he goes to make her a drink, and he's got the knife out, and when you see the knife, you're kind of a bit like, oh, is something going to happen with this knife? Because they focus on it a little bit too much. But he's just slicing a lemon, putting it in this water, and he goes to give it to her, but then the door goes. Kenton comes bursting through the door pretty much, and then just shoots Jamie. And it's like, it's brutal, and it's just quite a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, I felt for a while that Jamie wasn't going to survive the series. I really like him as a character. It was still really heartbreaking to watch. I'm glad that he didn't die when I first thought he died, when Kenton came into their house and did that horrible torture to him. He's just been through so much, but I'm glad he kind of got the arc that he got, even though it was a little bit disappointing. You know, we talked about last week the way they kind of got together in that slightly unromantic way. But yeah, hard to watch.
I mean, if Jamie hadn't seen Lily again, he would just be like happy as Larry. He would just be going along with his normal life. He's been completely roped into this whole crazy adventure and this DEVS project.
Yeah, it seems pretty unfair. He's had a rough few days in the story. But then we get a huge twist, and I want to know what you thought of this, and I want to know if you saw it coming. So Kenton looks like he's going to kill Lily. We know Lily's not going to die. She dies at DEVS or not. We know that's coming. But it's really intense. It really looks like Kenton's going to kill Lily. And then out of nowhere, or to me it felt really out of nowhere, Pete, the homeless guy, just shows up and just absolutely murders Kenton. I mean, that was exciting, and, you know, I felt the revenge moment. But you've been saying all along that, you know, something's going on with this Pete guy, this homeless guy, and, you know, we weren't sure what it was. Were you surprised, or did you see that coming?
I mean, I felt like he should have some sort of role in this episode, but I didn't expect what it was, I've got to be honest. I mean, they play it really well as well in episode 7, because before this moment, you see Pete just going about his ordinary life. He's like dancing for a busker, which is really random. There's a moment when he's just doing like a little dance, and he just looks out of it. He looks like someone who's sort of like on the edge of society. He doesn't look like what he turns out to be, a covert Russian spy keeping an eye on what's going on with the DEVS project, which is completely not what I thought it was going to be. But it makes so much sense, because the whole time he's there, and the other Russian operative said to Lily, like, we know what's going on where you are, there'll be someone there. And it just makes so much sense that it would be Pete.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that Pete then sits her down and really explains, like, look, this was a choice. He uses some quite specific language about making a choice, and we've heard a lot of contrary language about people's ability to make a choice. But the point that he's making is, it's very similar to the point that Sergei's handler made about Sergei, which is, you know, I've got my orders. Sergei had his orders. But our feelings for you and the way we think about you made us contravene these orders or do something independent to these orders. It really like builds up this idea that Lily is, you know, sort of special, right?
Yeah, definitely. And the way he's like talking about Lily as well, just saying how like she's caring and he's watched her and like he knows the kind of person she is. Again, it's all feeding into that sort of mythos about Lily. And you said that like in the first episode, I think you said everyone's talking about how great this girl is, and that's been like the running commentary throughout the series. And it kind of gets a big payoff later on, but it's constantly there, and Pete's really hammering it home in this scene.
Yeah, how did this whole like violent, horrible scene and Jamie dying, how did it change what you were feeling about Forrest? Because we both talked about Forrest in last week's episode, and you in particular were saying that, you know, he was seeming like a really nice guy. He's got this arm around the shoulder approach to Jamie. But now we know that the whole time he was having that conversation with Jamie, he must have known all this was coming. And he says to him, it's all going to be okay. Like, how did that make you kind of look differently at it all?
Yeah, it definitely did, because it gives you a reason as to why Forrest was being nice, because he knows that Jamie hasn't got much longer to live. He knows the outcome. So it's kind of the only thing he can do. He can't really be like a dick to him, because, I mean, what would the point in that be? Like, he knows how it's all going to turn out. Yeah, it did sort of make me switch a little bit, because it gives that reasoning as to why Forrest was being nice. Because normally he wouldn't necessarily need to be that nice and that sort of like complimentary about him.
Yes, there's a bit of guilt, and with that remorse that we did talk about last week, it's seemingly genuine remorse, but if he's feeling remorse for the right things, it's a little bit unclear still.
And also it made me think about that moment that Katie and Forrest were talking in bed about Lily and Jamie. And because they've been watching them so much on the DEVS project, it's like they're talking about their favourite characters in a TV show. They've sort of like, it's got that element to it, which I never really saw in the episode previously. So after this sort of like great devastating fight scene and all the carnage that that's caused, Lily's still making the decision as to whether she's going to go to the DEVS project or not, and whether she's going to use one of Pete's options. So Pete says you could go to the CIA, but then you'd be in hiding the whole time and blah, blah, blah. Or you could go to China because there's no extradition law over there. So she has those options. But when she's sort of like thinking about it all, you see her lying on the sofa. And throughout the series, there's been this shot of Lily, like with her head on a pillow. And it's not that same exact shot, but there's a lot of shots which have mirrored that. There's been lots of episodes where she's just woken up from sleep. And it's a thing which I've noticed. And that kind of makes a bit more sense now, because she has this major moment where her life is turned upside down. She's lost Jamie. She doesn't know what to do. And it's this moment which is the life-changing moment for her. So it's kind of makes sense that they keep going back to that shot and mirroring it. It's like a sort of deja vu kind of thing. Like she always kind of knew something was going to happen.
Yeah, I like the deja vu idea. That's a really interesting interpretation of that. I hadn't clocked all this recurring motif of the head on the pillow.
Yeah, it's worth looking at if you sort of like go through and have a skim. Like, I think there's quite a few moments where she's just sort of waking up.
So meanwhile, all of this is happening. The other big plot arc of this episode is that Lyndon has showed up in Katie's car. And obviously Katie and Forrest know that Lyndon's going to be in the car, and they brush it off in that dismissive, unpleasant way that they do. Even though, and you kind of know that something horrible is coming up, because Forrest just refers to it as that whole thing that Katie's got to go and deal with.
Oh, it sounds really menacing the way he says it as well. You know something's up.
Yeah. Lyndon's life has been forfeit, I think, in this TV show since the episode where he got kicked out of DEVS, basically. And it hasn't played out the way I thought it would at all. But yeah, I didn't have a lot of hope for Lyndon surviving the story either. But, I mean, in a way, Lyndon does survive in his own way, in his own beliefs, right? What did you make of that whole conversation they have about multiple universes and everything at the top of the dam?
I found it all quite unsettling because, like, throughout that scene, I was hoping that Lyndon was going to make it and it was going to be all okay. But it's not. So, yeah, because they're basically saying, okay, so Lyndon, you're right with your multiple worlds scenario. And if you stand there, I've seen it, I know what happens, I know that you're going to be okay, because in this particular variation that we're in now, it'll be the right sort of conditions for you to just be able to stand still on that railing.
Well, no, she offers that as a possibility, but she very explicitly, she won't tell him one way or the other if he does fall or not. The point that she's making is more like, if you truly believe in multiple worlds, then you know that there's an infinite number of you who fall off and an infinite number of you who don't fall off. And in those universes, I'll take that Lyndon to DEVS with me. That's the kind of promise. But it's this act of faith, like leap of faith, that she's insisting Lyndon does.
But it seems almost contradictory because she, like, you see all of the images of what could happen, and in none of those images you see Lyndon not fall. So it's like there is no occurrence where Lyndon didn't fall off that railing, which is a bit confusing, because if anything can happen and will happen and has happened, then surely there would be an instance which you would see with him not falling off the railing. As in when they did the scene with Forrest, and you saw all of the ones where, like, there's only one scenario where his wife and his daughter die. Yeah,
I clocked that too, that there's no scenario that we see anyway. And that seemed pretty deliberate, that we don't see a version where Lyndon survives. It added to the sinister tone of the whole conversation, right? Because it was another scene where one of the characters is kind of in control of a situation, but kind of playing off like they're not in control, and it's on the tram lines that they call it. it really reminded me of Sergei's death, in that that death made me view Forrest as incredibly cruel because he allowed this situation to play out and he'd seen it all happen. And it's the same with Katie. We know by the end of it that Katie saw Lyndon fall when she watched it on DEVS, and then she tells him that he's going to get on that railing and stand on that railing and do this test. She knows what the outcome is. Again, it's the same as it was for Forrest. Her argument would be, well, it's all tramlines and I was just playing my part as well. But it just doesn't sit right with me. It just feels really sinister. And it's like, well, you constructed that moment and you allowed it to happen and you made it happen by compelling him to climb up on that railing knowing that he would die. It's really grisly and cruel and mean. But Lyndon's totally bought into it and like just goes along with it.
Yeah, because they get him back into the cult at that point, don't they? Because they say, if you're a true believer, then you've got to do this. And by doing that, Lyndon is throwing away everything that he said in the previous episode, where he was sort of changing his mind and viewing this whole DEVS project and the Amaya company as something which wasn't as all-knowing as it seems to be. Yet, in this moment with Katie's got him back round to their way of thinking, hence why he's on that railing in the first place.
Yeah, it's just a really sad scene, and it's a really sad episode, right? Because two characters die in a really tragic way, and one character dies in a way that's, pretty celebratory, but two really likable characters get killed off, and it's really, really sad.
Yeah, it is. It's like it gets you in the feels, this episode. There's a lot going on. And because so much happened, I was like, how are they going to have enough for the next episode to have any major bits? But I think I was wrong in that assumption, because there's a lot that happens in the next episode as well, even though it's a bit more of a slow burn. There's not as many punctuating action moments as there are in this one.
Yeah, the pacing of the next episode is very, very weird. It's really good, but it is a weird structure to an episode. It works very well for this series, but it's definitely odd. Should we get into that then? Episode 8, the final episode?
Yeah, let's do it.
Hi, Lily. Come in. I'll tell you a secret. The sense that you were participating in life was only ever an illusion.
You tech leaders think that you're messiahs. You've taken everything from me.
I can't take what you never had.
So Stuart opens up this episode with his second reading of poetry. We didn't mention it just now, but as Lyndon is dying, very slowly falling, Stuart's reading a Philip Larkin poem with his beautiful, beautiful voice. He's got an absolutely lovely poetry reading voice. So he's reading that Philip Larkin poem. He also accuses Forrest of not knowing what the poem is, and he's actually a bit mad at Forrest for not even engaging in trying to guess. He's basically calling Forrest a bit of a Philistine, right? He's a dummy. He doesn't understand culture. He doesn't deserve DEVS. And this time he's reading a W.B. Yeats poem, which is all about rebirth, and I think it's called the Second Coming. So it's got a lot of religious allegory that's going to come to bear in this episode as well.
Yeah, and he refers to, like he says, do you know who Mark Antony was as well, doesn't he?
Yeah. I don't know a lot about Mark Antony. I know he was a Roman ruler. He's the one who was, he had an affair with Cleopatra, and I think that was bad for the Roman Empire. And he's Shakespeare wrote a play about him. So at first I thought that Stuart was quoting a Shakespeare play, because I know that Mark Antony is a big Shakespeare character. So when he's asking about Mark Antony, I'm not quite sure if Stuart was just probing him with these cultural references just to wind him up because he thinks he's a dummy, or if you know more about the story of Mark Antony. I don't know if there are like direct parallels with Forrest's life that Stuart was kind of trying to call his attention to. I'm not quite sure where that lands.
Yeah, I think it must be something like that. I mean, I don't know enough about Mark Antony to properly comment on it, but it seems like everything that Stuart is doing is very deliberate. And like you said, the poem's about the second coming, and that comes into play. I mean, we've been talking about the religious themes and sort of undertones throughout the entire series, but they really come to the forefront in this one. So what happens next? Lily has arrived at the DEVS building. She's finally made it to DEVS. She's decided, I'm going to go there. I'm not going to try and escape or anything like that. I'm going to go and have this kind of showdown.
Yeah, and she's greeted by Stuart, as Forrest was in the last episode as well. He's just sort of standing in the hallway of DEVS like this gatekeeper character that allows people in. My friend Liam and I were talking about this, and he mentioned that he thought the crossing was like the River Styx, which I thought was a really good analogy, because you're kind of like crossing into hell, and I think you've got to take a boat to cross the River Styx, so it's a bit like this pod that you cross in. And I also think in all that mythology, there's a character that's like responsible for taking your toll and sort of guiding you in on the boat and stuff. And I think Stuart's kind of like stepping into that role a little bit. You've got to like talk to this guy before you can go into DEVS, and he's very poetic and he's a bit of a mythic figure just unto himself, and he's going to play a massive role at the end of the episode as well. I thought that was interesting, and I thought it was a really good observation as well, the idea of the River Styx crossing into DEVS. Yeah,
that's a great idea, because it fits in so well with what's actually happening. And Stuart's giving Lily a warning as well, isn't he? He's saying, you look like a nice girl, you shouldn't really go in there, there's nothing for you there. So she's had that warning, yet she's determined she's going to go and she's going to confront Forrest and Katie.
Yeah, and not heeding that warning comes out in what she starts to say to Forrest when she finally gets in. You know, when she just talks about this idea of completely losing her sense of identity. She's at this point, she's starting to get signed up to the idea of the tram lines, but it's like it's really done a number on her brain at this point, hasn't it?
Yeah, because there was no scenario that she could think of that would mean that she was in the DEVS building at that time, like they predicted. And for her to now be doing it, it's like everything that she thought was completely wrong. So it's this moment of, it's like an existential crisis, isn't it? She doesn't know what her purpose is. What is she doing if this thing has just told her what she'll be doing anyway? So does that mean she ever chose to? And then Forrest puts it in another way, because he says he's watched this happen and unfold dozens of times. So he knows what's going to happen. Yet the words that are coming out of his mouth, he says it doesn't feel like he's repeating the words. It just feels like what he should be saying at the time, how he feels.
Yeah, that was interesting, wasn't it? How much did you believe that? Because again, that means that when he killed Sergei, I don't know if DEVS was really up and running when Sergei died, but certainly when Katie is on the dam with Lyndon, I guess what Forrest is saying is that she's acting naturally and it's not her in complete control of the conversation. I just don't know how much I buy it.
It's a weird one, because but then it probably does feel a bit, because I can't picture him sitting down with that script and memorizing it, but there must be part of him that knows the words, because he's watched it so many times. So it's a weird one. But either way, it's freaky the way he puts it.
He says a great line: the sense that you were participating in life was an illusion. It's just something you watch unfold like a movie on a screen. And to be sitting there watching the DEVS screen with lives unfolding on it, as he says that, it was a really good moment for that character and the whole series, I thought.
Yeah, and that feeds back into what I was saying previously about him and Katie talking about Lily and Jamie, and sort of like it's their favourite TV show. They've seen all these things. They've watched these movies. Everything else that's unfolding is just a rerun for them now.
How would you have acted in this scene? And I don't mean like as if you were an actor. How would you have behaved if you were Lily? The thing that I couldn't get out of my head was watching all of this and Forrest saying all of that stuff about like it was an illusion, you're just watching your life. Life is just something you watch unfold. The temptation to just do something that's not on the DEVS screen if you're watching your own future, I would find it irresistible. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So because what happens is they sit and they watch what's going to unfold in the next half an hour, whatever it is. So it's this really weird edit that they've done where you see what's happening, you see it again later on. But yeah, I don't know what I would do, because presumably the way that the DEVS machine works is you've seen it, so you can't undo it. There's nothing that you can do. Even though they had that conversation previously where if they saw that they had their hands in their pockets or they had their hands doing something, they would do the opposite because they've just seen it. So they've kind of put that principle there previously. But I don't know. I don't know what I would do in that weird situation.
So the way it plays out is he plays her a projection of her leading him into the cube, shooting him. The cube collapses, they both die, and we're seeing it as they're watching it on the screen, and then it plays out in real life. All I kept thinking was, as she was watching it, I was just thinking, shoot him now, then you won't die. Shoot him now, and it'll break his machine. It won't be true. Do it. Like, that's the urge that I'd be fighting in that situation, of just, sod this. I don't want to play your game. Sod your machine. I came here to kill you anyway. I'm not only going to kill you and save my own life, but I'm going to defy your machine. I mean, she does kind of make that choice in the end, doesn't she?
I suppose at that point, though, everything's still fresh in her mind, and she's had all of this weight of what's happened to Jamie on her and all of the drama with that. So it's kind of like now she finally... She was so adamant that it was all bullshit before, but now having that happen to her, she kind of feels like it is happening and it is real.
Yeah, and I guess she's still in the grips of the mindfuck, essentially, that's brought her in here and left her feeling like she doesn't know who she is.
So we find out a little bit more about the dead mouse as well at this point, don't we?
Do we?
Well, they show shots of it, don't they? And then Forrest is explaining how the machine works. And then it looked to me like the dead mouse is somewhere in DEVS, and that's the point of origin that they got the whole project to work by. Because they said just keep going outwards when they were scanning that mouse. So that's the key to how they now understand the state of everything, as I think they put it. And they also talk about how this information works. And we talked about it like it's like a home movie and you're watching it unfold. But these simulations are more than that. At least that's how Forrest puts it. Because they're not just these movies, they are the essence of someone. So they have those emotions, they have those feelings, they are that person in that moment of time, like completely, even though they're like a weird visualized simulation, everything about them is exactly the same. And that was like a really, really sort of fascinating idea. But the first thing that Forrest wants to do with it, he says, we own all of that information. So we own the universe. So he makes a claim for it rather than being like, isn't this amazing? The first thing he says is, we own it.
Yeah, he's gonna go back to Amaya, which is kind of like his original reason for doing everything. And the whole time we've kind of been going along with him on this track that it's all about recreating Amaya or just seeing Amaya or whatever. And he does talk about this now, but you're right, he does make this point about owning it, and he talks about its big data. It's like we're seeing this glimpse of the tech entrepreneur side of Forrest re-emerging, and it's like, oh well, actually how much of this was just kind of a business play? That idea of ownership was an interesting like spanner in the works of Forrest's character so late in the game.
Because at this point, if he's saying that this simulation is Amaya basically, but the problem is he can't interact with it. He can't be with Amaya because they're in different realms of reality. So that's a weird thing for them as well. But theoretically, he is resurrecting his daughter. This whole project has been about him bringing his daughter back to life. And according to him, that's what he's done. He's brought her to life in this simulation.
Yeah, and Lily tries to challenge it. She says that no, it's just a simulation. She's just she phrases it in a way that's very convenient for Forrest to retort to, but she's basically saying she's just going through the motions of predetermined actions, and Forrest says, well, so am I, so are you. And I guess we're getting now to the point where I guess this is everything Forrest wanted from DEVS. He just wanted this perfect whole recreation of Amaya, and he seems to not even mind that it would end with Amaya's death when she died. He just wanted this universe where he can view her existing in real time before she was dead.
Yeah, exactly. And to go back to the dead mouse, my favourite topic of conversation. So the mouse, you know that moment, so we're talking about like how Amaya is like a real simulation. Like, even though she's on the screen, she's real in sort of most senses, any sense you can think of. And there's that moment we talked about previously when there was that split second where you saw the dead mouse and you saw like a weird, like it looked like it was alive again. So I can only presume that that moment was Katie looking at the mouse on the simulation and seeing it as being alive. And in that sense, the mouse came back to life, because if everything on that screen is real, then that mouse came back to life.
Are you saying that you think that Katie ran some kind of simulation of the mouse similar to what we're going to see in a few minutes in the episode? Okay. Yeah, possibly. Yeah. So you think that actually that was the end point of DEVS, and what happens to DEVS at the end of this episode was always intended. It was just intended to be a way to interact with Amaya and recreate Amaya.
Yeah, quite possibly.
What did you think of the revelation that DEVS has a real name and it's DEVS, so it's a Roman V?
I quite liked it, and it's very much like, oh, so it all makes sense now. It was one of those kind of moments, but I had seen this floating around on the internet, I can't lie. I'd seen someone put DEVS, then put Deus Ex Machina on it. And obviously the connections to Ex Machina are there in this. Obviously that was Garland. It's a spin-off project. So Deus Ex Machina means God from the machine. And that's exactly what Forrest is trying to do with this. He's trying to be a god. He's trying to bring people back to life. He's trying to control the world. He's trying to control the universe, trying to have ownership of it. So he wants to be a god. And he's doing that from the machine. So that sort of element's in there. And what did you think about the fact that, so he was just like, oh, it's a cheeky little in-joke. What did you think about that whole thing?
I thought, to be honest, the Nick Offerman's delivery of that line, it was just a private little joke, is the only thing that kept me going there, because I thought it was pretty silly that it turned out it was called Deus. I was a bit like, oh, okay. You're obsessed with this phrase, aren't you, Mr. Garland?
But then it's the kind of thing that you'd expect from Forrest, isn't it? Like you said, the way he delivers the line, the kind of character he is. He's like a tech entrepreneur. He's a guy who would do these like almost cringy little in-jokes on his projects just to sort of show his like superiority, that he knows a little bit more than everybody else.
Yeah, and that he's incredibly arrogant, and he's fully acknowledging the idea of he's a human being who's trying to create/destroy God, or the concept of God, and in that way put himself in that place, I guess. So the real showdown of the whole series then follows, where we're seeing the projection play out in real life. Lily leads Forrest out of the room into the cube. They're all saying the lines exactly as we've just seen it happen, but it doesn't go the way it happened on the projection, and there is a twist, and Lily kind of breaks the rules. Were you at that point just kind of like expecting a rule break to happen, or did you think that it was all going to play out like the projection?
I couldn't tell at that point. The thing which was on my mind when it was happening is, how are they going to make it look less like the scene they've just shown? So they change the perspective, don't they? So in the visualization, you see all of them and then it unfolding, but then they kind of change it to Katie's perspective, and then they change it a bit to Stuart's perspective from across the sort of gangway. So that's what was on my mind more than what's going to happen next. I kept thinking, how's he going to show this, but show it in a way that's not going to be like, oh, I've just watched this, it's going to be boring. But yeah, I thought they would get across. That was my prediction. I was like, they're going to get across, they're not going to fall. And then that will be the twist. But, so in each of the scenarios they've watched, each time Lily shoots Forrest in the head, in the eye, I think it is, and then the box that's carrying them falls to the ground and they both die.
Because the bullet fractures the glass, and that messes up the vacuum seal, and then the whole thing falls apart. Horrible construction on this big cube, very unsafe, but that's how it plays out.
And it is what they said at the start. They said it's like a vacuum. How have you done that? Oh, blah, blah, blah. We don't know. But that shot as well, so when they see it on the visualization on the screen, that shot of the empty box is the shot we see at the beginning of the show. So I was kind of like, but there's nobody in that original shot. So how are they going to do it? So it confused me at that point.
You mean the very start of this episode?
Yeah, the very start of the episode.
There's no bodies in the broken case.
It doesn't look like it, and not that you can see. I mean, it might be that Forrest's body's in there, but because he's laying down, you can't see it, and Lily will have crawled away by that point. But I was looking carefully at the shots to try and see. But I think there is, in one of the scenarios that you see, there's a moment where it's just the box. And that scenario is the one that actually happens.
So you're saying there is a possible projection that actually showed the correct future, but Katie and Forrest haven't seen this projection, because we're seeing a flash forward at the start of the episode where there's no bodies in the cube, which is what plays out. They both crawl out. But this just isn't a projection that Katie or Forrest have been shown by DEVS.
I don't know if it's a projection, that first shot, but they're basically showing a scenario where it's not what happens on the DEVS machine.
But it's Stuart in the end that fucks the whole thing up.
Yeah, so Lily doesn't shoot. She doesn't use the gun. She chucks it away. And then Forrest loses his shit about this. He's like, no, this can't happen. And everyone's in a state of shock. And you think, okay, so they are going to make it across. It's all going to be okay. But no, Stuart has other ideas.
Why does he do it? Stuart meddles with the panel, basically just overrides it so that the lift, or whatever you want to call it, thinks a bullet's gone through it, thinks there's a problem with the vacuum seal, and just like sabotages it, basically. I'm still a little bit confused about why he did it.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Because he says, I didn't have a choice, it was already predetermined. But I don't know if he's watched that visualization or not, if he's seen what's going to happen, and if he felt like it had to happen that way. Because we've said before that he seemed like a bit of he's bought into the cult. He's like a true believer. At least he was previously. Seeing all of this now has made him a bit worried about what the DEVS project can do and what the potential is. So I don't know why he does it, because he just says, oh, it's because it's predetermined, I had to do it.
He sounds almost sarcastic when he says that, though. He says he does it because he had to. Somebody had to stop it, I think is what he says, which I understand. I think he's got to a point where he sees the entire project as morally wrong and he wants to put an end to it. But Lily was doing that. She was going to take Forrest outside and shoot him in the head underneath the big statue.
Which would have been great. Would have been great to see.
There was a moment where I thought that Stuart was so bought into everything that what he was doing was trying to force the projection to be as true as possible. So Lily's broken the rules, and he's going to try and just kill them both and make everything look as much like it should have done in the DEVS projection as possible. But I don't think that's what he's doing because of what he says, because he says he just wanted to put a stop to it.
And again, I suppose it's because he's demonstrating free will in a similar way to how Lily is, because Lily chooses not to do what the projection says and goes against it. And then isn't Stuart doing a similar thing? But he's trying to get it back on track. I don't know. It's very confusing. It's a bit of a mindfuck.
Yeah. Or maybe Lily's free will choice has kind of opened the doors to more of those happening in that world.
So why do you think the DEVS machine didn't work from this point?
So my understanding of what happens next was that Katie kind of reboots everything and repurposes the DEVS machine to be a constant real-time simulation featuring the memories of Forrest and the memories of Lily. But what you were just saying about maybe that was the intention of DEVS all along because she did a simulation with the mouse kind of muddies that idea. The way I understood it was because she had then repurposed what DEVS was doing, that's why there's no projections from DEVS prior to that point, because after this point, DEVS is not a projection engine, it's a simulation engine.
I think that would make sense. I didn't really think of it like that, because in my head, it was like a HAL situation. So in 2010, when we watched that, we found out the reason Hal malfunctions is because he's told to lie, but he can't lie, and it's really confusing him. So in this, the DEVS projection is supposed to be right every time, and then it finds out that it's not right, so it has like a weird meltdown and can't function anymore, like an overload. And that's why there's no projection after that point, because the DEVS system can't do it because it's confused itself too much. So I don't know if that's another reading of it.
Yeah, it kind of reading some personality into the DEVS machine there.
Yeah, but you don't have to view it with a personality. It could just be that it can't compute what's happening.
Yeah. But I don't think it's broken down, and I don't think it's failed, because it's still the DEVS machine that is running what we are led to believe is going to be a permanent simulation now. So DEVS is still working at full capacity. It's just doing a different job. So this breakdown, I don't think it's had some sort of fundamental breakdown, because otherwise Katie wouldn't be able to use it to do what she does with Forrest and Lily.
Yeah, I'm definitely coming around to the repurposing idea, because I think that fits in better with what actually happens in the show.
So what does happen? Forrest just like wakes up in this simulation room, and he's able to talk to Katie, and then seemingly at the same time, Lily's sort of gone back in time, back to episode 1 with Sergei, but she's got all her memories of everything that happened, and she's obviously very traumatized by it.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Because the way just before they set up this new repurposing of the DEVS project, which I'm now adopting as my way of talking about it. So having committed that moment, having gone against what the visualization said, Katie refers to her as Eve, like, because of what she's done is she's created the original sin. She's gone against what the DEVS project was supposed to do, it's supposed to predict. So in doing that, she's shown free will, and that's how they got kicked out of the Garden of Eden in the sort of like the biblical tale, because Eve took the apple and went against what she was supposed to do. Lily's going against what she's supposed to do in this moment. We haven't even talked about the lines that she says, because I think those lines are great, because in all of the visualizations, Forrest says, you know what happens to messiahs? They get resurrected. So he's already dropping this idea that that's going to happen.
Yeah, you mentioned that Forrest seems really upset when he's in that lift and she kind of breaks the rules of the projection. And you were talking about that in terms of that he's upset because it's not going according to the plan, and he's obsessed with the tram lines. But I also saw a little bit of that arrogant messiah in Forrest in that moment, because he's been talking about how messiahs get resurrected. He's also expecting to die imminently. So at this point, he's in full messiah mode. He believes he's going to die, and he believes he's going to be resurrected, even though he's got no reason to think that. That's pure egotism, right? Because he's seen no projections beyond that point. He just believes two things to be true, which is that he's going to die and that he is some kind of messiah. And he's reading beyond that, hey, no worries, I'm the messiah, messiahs get resurrected.
But I think he must know what the plan is, because Katie, they've discussed what's going to happen, and they must have discussed sort of, because the project's called DEVS, it's like God from the machine, and that's what they sort of turn Forrest into. So they must have chatted about that previously, because what happens afterwards? What do you not reckon?
I don't know, maybe, but he seems quite surprised when he pops back to life in the simulation, and Katie has to explain to him where he is and what's going on. I don't know. I wouldn't put it past them to have planned that, but I'm not sure. You know, that's a big unresolved question, isn't it? Which is, you know, was that the plan with DEVS all along? Was Katie doing these simulations with bringing the mouse back to life, and was that what Forrest wanted for Amaya, or is Katie kind of winging it on the fly, and she's able to run this simulation and repurpose DEVS as like an emergency situation? I'm not quite sure where I land on that.
Yeah, it's like, it's pretty ambiguous, isn't it? But I feel like, so Forrest's finally created this image of his daughter. All he needs to do now is actually be with her, And the only way to do that is to get in the machine and be a part of it and then join in this simulation which they're creating, which seemingly, like, according to them, is as real as any other universe.
Yeah, so it goes back to what Stuart was saying at the start of episode 7, and Forrest's been talking about it a little bit in this episode. It's this idea that there's a whole universe within DEVS, and that universe is as valid as our external universe on the other side of it. It reminded me of, we talked about the simulation hypothesis when we were talking about The Matrix, because that's the film that it kind of most lines up with. This idea that you could, it's more like an existential fear that some people have, that they're living in a perfect simulation of reality, or it's perfect enough that the human brain can't see the joins and can't see the lines. And that is essentially what Forrest willingly uploads himself into at the end of DEVS, and also kind of drags Lily into whether she wants to or not, I think, a little bit. I don't think she's got much say in it.
Yeah, because she's the only person who remembers up to that point in that simulation, doesn't she? Like, it's just her and Forrest.
Yeah, she's kind of gone into the Messiah role. And I think throughout this whole series, and it kind of plays out at the end here, there are, to go back to The Matrix, there are parallels between her character and Neo. She's this computer nerd, computer genius, quite unassuming, and gets caught up in this conspiracy and gets wrapped up in it, and the people around her think she's amazing, and there's all these prophecies about what her role in it's going to be, and then she's the one to, and the prophecy involves her dying, same as Neo, and she kind of breaks that and is able to come back to life in this computer simulation. It kind of happens a bit differently because she really does die permanently in the quote-unquote real world, the one world, but then she gets to be reborn in the other world, which is the DEVS world.
Yeah, Forrest definitely sort of turns her into a Messiah-like figure, but then I feel like she had no say in any of this. She wasn't... I feel more like... So Forrest is turning himself into a god, and as he's doing that, he feels like he needs to have somebody else to fill that sort of Messiah role almost. So it's kind of like he needs that to sort of... if he's as egotistical as we say he is, if he's a god in this machine, he needs somebody else to know that he's a god.
That's a really good observation, because what good is it being the most powerful man in the universe if nobody's aware of how powerful you are and what a wonderful thing you've created? He's got what he wants in having Amaya and his wife back, but yeah, there's that sense of like he needs an audience, doesn't he? He needs people to be aware of how magical he is, and he can't do that without Lily having all of her memories.
And he's kind of like, oh, go live your perfect life. I've given this to you. This is my sort of gift to you because you've helped me become this.
Yeah, and even that was a little bit hollow, wasn't it? Because her life's not that perfect. She gets something of a happy ending in that, you know, she's got the benefit of hindsight with Sergei and she can go off and be with Jamie, but Jamie's still dead in the real world, and she watched it happen, and she's got all the memories of that, and that's still all there, and she kind of knows she's in a simulation. So this happy ending only works if she can really accept this idea that DEVS is so thorough a recreation of the universe that it is reality in itself.
And in the reality that we know on the other side of DEVS, things are very different, aren't they? Because Katie is running out of money from the sounds of it. She's trying to get the government to fund this weird simulation. And then it gets a bit more shady at that point because they're like, I think the senator or whatever that character is, she's asking how many people know about this project. They obviously want more of a handle over it so they can probably use it in whatever way they want to. So it gets a bit darker with that.
Yeah, there was a sense of that, wasn't there? Because I guess Amaya as a company is going to fall apart now because the charismatic cult leader has died a grisly death. So she's asking for that support, but well, what's the government going to get out of it?
And it makes the simulation seem more like a life support machine rather than this sort of great new universe. It's all just, it could go with a flick of a switch and then that entire universe is gone. So that kind of adds another layer to it, a bit more foreboding in the background.
Yeah. Did you think there was any setup for a sequel there?
No. I don't want to see a sequel to Devs. I think it was perfectly rounded. You've got a nice ending to it. It was satisfying. I don't think they needed to continue this story. I mean, obviously you can do like spin-offs and things like that, like different, using similar ideas. But I think Alex Garland's once he's done a certain thing, he doesn't want to repeat it.
I don't particularly want a sequel, and I wasn't expecting one. But I did get a bit of a sense of that just in that last moment where the government's getting back involved and the simulation's going to be permanently running, and the simulation now does a different thing to what we knew Devs to be for most of the series. So I felt like the door was left just a crack open for a series 2. And I also, you know how, what is it? It's FX, isn't it? Which is part of Fox. So that's a major network. There's a lot of pressure. I don't know what sort of contract Alex Garland signed in terms of getting this thing made and what Fox might have the rights to do with the property. You know, there's an inkling there that someone could make a follow-up to this if they wanted to, if there was enough motivation. I'm not saying that's something I want. I think it is a good ending and it's perfectly rounded, but I'm not ruling it out.
On the other side of things, I think they have made it very clear that it's a mini-series. They've said that a lot in the marketing. So, but obviously it depends on the success and how they think if they think they can get more interest in a sequel of some sort. But personally, I think this was, like you said, well-rounded. It's a complete thing and it doesn't need anything more than that. It's a nice sort of like end to it all. And it wasn't a lost ending.
Yeah, and it wasn't all bullshit, and it did all kind of play out. And it was nice and surprising, even though it played out kind of the way we were talking about. I mean, we were still thinking like maybe a big earthquake was going to happen, but we thought that was too obvious. You were saying last week that there was going to be some switch into a different reality or something, which was like right on the money. And I think you were talking about Lily as like a godlike figure as well. You called up some big guesses last week, and I think a lot of it came to bear, but maybe not in the way we were thinking. That's what makes it such a good ending.
Yeah, I think even though I had all those things in the back of my head, I couldn't have predicted how it went. And it was just so seamless as well. And the idea of it being a virtual reality kind of simulation at the end of it. And it's such a clever little idea, but it's one that they've only teased at, and they've never really said that's what the Devs project could be used for. And they kept you looking one way, and then they snuck this out on the other side. But it all makes sense. It all links up like completely.
Yeah, it's a lovely end to the series. I think it's a lovely end to our Devs podcast mini-series.
Yes, that's it for our Devs mini-series. We covered all 8 episodes. It was quite a journey. Wild speculations, twists and turns, different characters. I never found out about the golf buggy, but I mean, I'll let that slide. But yeah, I've really enjoyed this. It's been nice to do something a little bit different on the podcast.
Yeah, I love that it crossed lines into various different types of sci-fi. You know, we had some AI at the end. You were saying that you thought AI was going to come back into it, and what Lily and Forrest become is essentially a form of AI, although arguably it's not artificial. They are real intelligence that's just been uploaded to a system. There's a little bit of like a time travel feel because Lily goes back in time 2 days, but with all of her knowledge, and gets to like relive her decisions. I was kind of hoping that, because it's kind of implied that everything's just going to play out exactly like it did in the real universe. But you'd kind of hope that maybe the bloodshed doesn't have to happen. Maybe Forrest asked Katie to tweak things so Sergei doesn't have to be murdered with a plastic bag, you know.
They did say it was the most perfect version of how things could go for them. But then, do they have life like a life expectancy? Are they going to live out their lives and then die? Is Forrest going to let himself do that? Or is he going to become like fully go God mode on everyone and just do what he wants forever?
Is there a possibility that they're now living in the box, as Stuart called it? Can Forrest then go into the box within the box, and then into the box within the box within the box, and live forever in deepening universes of Deus boxes?
Wow, that that kind of blows my mind a little bit.
Yeah, you got virtual reality, you've got alternate dimensions, time travel, AI, predicting the future, all of this. There's so much sci-fi stuff here, but it's really held together with some good structure, right? It's not as messy as that sounds.
And it's grounded as well. It's all grounded in a sense of reality, and it's got these other sort of like subgenre bits coming in, like the whole spy subtext, the whole spy bit of it. It's just, it's got a lot to it. It's great. That's all I can say. It's great.
They can put that on the DVD cover.
It's great. By Journey Through Sci-Fi.
Okay, well, that's the end of our Devs mini-series. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the TV show as much as we obviously did, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to us talk about it. Please do drop us a line, get in touch. You can find us on Twitter at Through Sci-Fi Pod. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook. Anywhere you want to find us, give us a search. Come and say hello.
And feel free to leave us a nice comment or a review. Anything like that always helps us to get more listeners and get the word out about the show. So we greatly appreciate anything like that, any feedback you guys can give us. Also, tell us if there's anything you want to hear us talk about on the show. Get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.
Normal podcasting will resume soon. We'll be finishing up our space series, so come and join us for that. We'll see you soon.